Wanda Morris, may I call on you? Thank you.
One of the women that provided testimony in the Carter case, the case with Gloria Taylor in BC that has recently been heard by the BC Court of Appeal, was a woman by the name of Leslie LaForest. And Leslie was one of the 50 or so lay individuals who gave testimony about why they wanted assistance to die. Leslie is not a woman who wants to die, and she had very much said that she wanted to live. However, Leslie has anal cancer. She has a tumor growing beside her bowel. Her doctors want to operate, but if she has that operation, her vagina will become irreparably scarred. Intercourse will no longer be possible, and even the simple act of going to the bathroom, of urination, will be painful. I'm hearing some feedback from the microphone. Is that better? Can you hear that? Okay. However, if she doesn't have that operation with its horrific side effects, the tumor beside her anus will grow and grow until her bowels are completely blocked. She will no longer be able to eliminate waste. The toxins will accumulate in her body. Her arms and legs will swell until the pressure forces the waste out of every available orifice in her body, and she is literally vomiting feces. Is it any wonder that she would prefer a different choice? She's not facing the prospect of physical pain, but she's facing the prospect of pain nonetheless. I'm hearing the mic keep... Is there a different way for me to...
No, there isn't.
Okay.
Just keep that. We can all hear you.
How about that? Imagine that you are a farmer with bone cancer. Initially, every step hurt, and now every breath hurts. So you're lying in your bed in your farmhouse and you say, enough. Enough. And somehow you find the energy to cross the room and you open the top drawer on your bureau, take out the pistol, and take the gun and go behind the back of the barn and hold the gun to your head and pull the trigger. And inside the farmhouse, your wife and your son hear the shot, and they look at each other, and your son says, no, no, Mom, me, I'll go. And so that is the last memory that he has of you. That is the way he sees you, with your body in one piece and your head in several more, because you have taken the only available way out. Right now, far too many people who are terminally ill in Canada end their life by violent means. Traumatic for them, traumatic for their families, and traumatic for first responders who arrive on the scene. We need to give these people a better way. That is why I and my organization believe in the right to what we call medically assisted dying, physician-assisted dying, or end-of-life choice. We've heard the argument around language that what we're really doing is trying to disguise the words, and really what we're talking about is suicide. Let me give you, I'm an accountant by background, so let me try to give you a graph. When we think of someone who is suicidal, if this is our health, kind of from 0 to 100, it's generally somebody whose health is very good perhaps a mental health condition, and suddenly and tragically and irreversibly they end their life. That is so very different from the people that we support in our client support program and in the individuals who we advocate for choice. Those are people whose lives have been diminishing by progressive degrees as their irremediable illnesses, their grievous suffering continues, and they see no way out. They would love the choice to continue living, but they don't have it. They have been afflicted with a particular disease that has taken their life. So what they're asking for is a peaceful, a gentle death, another alternative. Our clients would tell you that the last thing they are is suicidal. But given that they are looking death in the eye, they would like to have the choice for a peaceful and a gentle death. My colleague has talked about people in hopelessness and despair. I can tell you from my work with our clients that our clients, those who seek our information and emotional support about how, when they are grievously ill, they might control their options. They are people who love life. And it is that very love of life that means that when the alternative offers such little quality, they ask for another way out. Now, yesterday was a historic day in the United States. Vermont became the 4th state in the United States to affirm the right for individuals to have medically assisted dying. The governor has pledged to sign the bill into law. It's a historic moment because this is the first state where a governor actually campaigned on the province, on the promise to introduce end-of-life choice, and was elected on that basis. What we are seeing is a change in attitudes, not only in Canada and the US, but around the world. We have had such gifts from medical technology, yet there is a dark side. Sometimes we can be forced to stay alive against our will. In Canada, there's a landmark case featuring a woman by the name of Nancy B. And in the early 1990s, she was a woman with a rare genetic disorder, paralyzed, stuck in a hospital bed. Her views were either the television in the hospital or the paint on the walls of the room. She was on life support, and she wanted to end her life. She asked her doctors to remove her life support, and they said no. Said, if we do that, we'll end your life. We cannot possibly allow you to stop this treatment, which will end your life. She took her case to the courts in Quebec, and she won. And it was a foundational case in Canada asserting our right to have autonomy over our bodies, even if we should choose to exercise that autonomy and it would inevitably lead to death. Yes, some of us may identify as rigid, independent, and self-controlling, but who are others to judge us for that? Many people who argue for end-of-life choice from an ethical point of view say that there is really no difference between stopping life support and assisting somebody to end their life. With so many good reasons to support dying, assisted dying at end of life, why do people object? Now, sometimes the objections are rooted in deep religious convictions, and I absolutely respect those. If your beliefs are that God will never give you more than you can handle, and that whatever happens to you is God's will, absolutely, I respect you for holding that position. But I take issue with you trying to use the coercive power of government to impose those views on others who don't hold them. If we look at some of the other critiques of the system, they really fall into two camps. Either that there are abuses currently which we need to avoid, or that if we allow this to happen, then there will inevitably be abuses in the future. To address the first one, I'd like to use the words of a colleague of mine who says, "It is easier to believe a simple lie than a complex truth." Or as Mark Twain put it so poetically, a lie is halfway around the world while truth is still putting on its shoes. Imagine that you're in a town with some busy intersections, and you come up with the idea that, there's been some accidents at a particular intersection, and we could make that intersection safer by painting a crosswalk. And so you paint the crosswalk, and then in the next few months you monitor the accidents, and you know what? There are some accidents. Pedestrians are getting hit by cars. Do you conclude that the accidents happened because you painted the crosswalks? I suspect that what you would do is look at the accidents that happened before the crosswalk was painted, and maybe look at accidents at other similar intersections that don't have crosswalks and compare the accident rates there too. So when we hear about the fact that there is an abuse or abuses out of the Netherlands or out of Belgium, I think, first of all, that we have to address those, and that we have to give credit to Belgium and the Netherlands for measuring and monitoring and evaluating and following these up. But I think we also have to look at those numbers in context and say, what happened before legalization? And be very influenced by the fact that since legalization, these abuses have fallen in half. I think we also need to be influenced in what happens in other jurisdictions without legalization. So we can look to the similar studies done in Australia and New Zealand and note that if this was the rate in Belgium, which was higher than the rate in the Netherlands, both of which decreased with legalization, that the rates in New Zealand and Australia are higher still, and we have no evidence of a decline. It's important to understand that what we advocate is not simply decriminalization of our current law. We don't simply want to strike down the prohibition in the criminal code against assisted suicide. What we want to do is legalize medically assisted dying under certain strict criteria and regulations, so that, for example, only people who are at end of life, who are grievously ill, suffering irremediately, the sick and the dying, faced with an intolerable situation and unbearable suffering, have the right to choose support to end their lives. The other argument, and we heard it raised earlier today, against legalizing choice is this idea that, we can see how the Gloria Taylors and the Sue Rodriguez and the Susan Griffiths would want this, but if we allow that group to have choice, then, oh my goodness, the next thing you know, the disabled, the elderly, this will be a cure for the healthcare budgeting system, that suddenly, everyone will be forced to die against their will. And I think we only have to look at the legislation in place in the Netherlands, in Oregon, in Belgium. We have 10 to 15 years of history here, and what we can see is that there has never been a change in the legislation in any of these places. It is exactly as it was written when it was introduced. Furthermore, there is no reported evidence of abuse. It's difficult at a forum like this to know, who do you trust? She seems credible, but so did he. What do I do? What do I think? I would say that one thing we could take comfort from is the ruling that came out of the BC Supreme Court. Because there what we had is panels of experts from both sides providing testimony, being cross-examined, and finally being reviewed by an independent judge, somebody with a constitutional expertise. And after reviewing all the evidence, Justice Lynn Smith said that she was convinced that the safeguards work, that we could have both, that we could give the Sue Rodriguez and Gloria Taylors and Susan Griffiths a choice at end of life while still protecting our weak and our vulnerable. One of the other comments that was made was that this only affects a small number of people. You know, less than 1% in Oregon, only 2% in the Netherlands. Why should we knock ourselves out for such a small number? Well, of course it is a small percentage. Nevertheless, that's 5,000 to 10,000 people a year. But I think the bigger point can be made by asking a couple questions. Who here has ever been on a boat or a cruise? And how many of you would have been on a cruise that's had lifeboats and trained personnel who could evacuate you and life jackets? Okay? And how many of you have used those? I think there's a big difference between knowing that something is in place and getting comfort from it and actually needing to use it at the end of life. Hopefully none of us will. And I think one of the wonderful things that happens from this legislation is that people realize that they have a choice, that if the worst comes to the worst, they have another way out. And so they hold on. And many of them die a natural death. And we see that with our clients too. They come and they ask for our support. They want the information. If they need to, they can hasten their dying. And then they have a natural death. And I think that is fabulous. And it is a success of our program and a success, not a failure of the legislation. I'd like to close with a couple of final comments. One of the researchers who's been very active in this field is a woman by the name of Margaret Pabst Batten. And she had a very novel idea. She said, well, if the weak and the vulnerable, if the very elderly, if the disabled are the ones who are really at risk, then if we look at the numbers of people who have used this legislation, that's what we'll find. So she did. She and her team of researchers studied all the demographics from individuals from the Netherlands and from Oregon to see who was there. Was it, the frail elderly? Was it people from ethnic communities? Was it income disadvantaged individuals? And what her research showed was that it was the privileged, not the vulnerable, that were using it. If there was one group in particular, we would describe them as male atheist engineers. But it is the educated, the Caucasian, tending to be middle-aged folks, chiefly with diagnosis of cancer and ALS, things like that, that were availing themselves of this legislation. In terms of feeling pressured that we might think others are better off without us, I can tell you that from the families that we've worked with, people who are intent on hastening their dyings generally do so in fierce opposition to their family, who would love the opportunity to keep them and look after them just a little bit longer. We do have this incredible ability to adapt. We need the opportunity to have the hope that we have a choice so that that ability to adapt will kick in. There is some suffering that only death can end. When people face that intolerable suffering, they need a compassionate choice.